Hi, my name is Dennis Downey. I've written a collection of short stories called A Few Steps from the Grave. This is one of those stories. Its name is The Hoax. It started as a hoax. Three boys at Ragdale High began spreading rumors of monsters living in Potbelly, a swamp of cancerous trees, weeds, and brush formed at the confluence of Arden Creek and Fletcher Creek. There were numerous paths cutting through Potbelly. Paths used for grade schoolers and high schoolers alike to travel from their homes to Timmins Elementary School and Ragdale High. For many kids, there was no avoiding the tangle of trees and brush. It was the only reasonable way to get to school if you had to walk or ride your bike. The story spread like a fungus on a piece of white bread. Some said that the monster lived in the water. Some said it lived in the trees. Some said it lived in the brush. There was plenty of all three in Potbelly. Monster or no monster, Potbelly could be a scary place. Tom Farnell, Gary Spivot, and Big Lou Springle were the creators of the myth. They were all seniors at Ragdale High. Tom and Gary both had cars to drive to school, but Big Lou was forced to walk through Potbelly every day. As most stories do, the hoax took on a life of its own. High schoolers and grade schoolers began reporting sightings of the monster. Some reports portrayed the monster as a scaled creature the size of an alligator. Others said it was a hairy beast the size of a man with sharp black claws and razor-sharp teeth. Even others proclaimed the beast was a man. They said it was Bran Harbinger, who had escaped from Trent State Prison just 40 minutes from Ragdale. Kids began avoiding Potbelly, where it had once been a place of wonder and mystery. Potbelly became a place of dread, a place of evil. Big Lou had been the one that started the hoax, and even he began avoiding Potbelly. "Hey, Tom, how about giving me a ride to school?" Big Lou asked his best friend. "You're not believing the stories, are you?" Tom asked. "For crying out loud, Lou. We were the ones that started all the hoopla, remember?" "I don't know, Tom. There's been sightings." "Bullshit," Tom told him. "It's just a case of kids seeing things that aren't there." "So why can't you give me a ride, Tom?" Big Lou asked. He was determined not to have to walk through Potbelly alone. "Give Gary a call," Tom told him. "He lives a lot closer to you than I do." "I already called Gary," Big Lou grumbled. "He told me to call you." "Listen to you, Lou. You're talking like a little grade schooler. Kids have been walking through the belly since Roy Rogers was in diapers." "I don't care how long they've been going down there," Big Lou declared. "I don't want to. It's a place for kids." He didn't want to admit to his fear. He used to love Potbelly. Lou, Tom, and Gary used to play there for hours when they were kids. When they were freshmen and sophomores in high school, they even camped down there on weekends when their parents would allow. But now, Potbelly had gone from a place of adventure to a place of fear. "I'll tell you what, Lou. If you walk to school through Potbelly for the entire week, Gary and I will camp there with you this weekend." "I'm not camping there," Lou said. "I'll walk to school through Potbelly this week if you and Gary won't give me a ride. But you and Gary have to camp there by yourselves." That's ridiculous, Lou. Are you chicken, Tom? We'll see who's chicken this weekend, Tom told him. It was the week of a sliver moon, and the moon was waning. It was supposed to be overcast on the weekend, so there wouldn't even be starlight. Unlike large cities, Ragdale was a country town where there was no refracted light. When it was dark, it was truly dark. Even Disneyland can be foreboding in total blackout. Tom and Gary planned on camping in the Belly on Saturday night. Gary hadn't wanted to go. He was starting to believe in the tales as well, but Tom goaded him into it. I don't want to camp too far into Potbelly, Gary told him. I think we should camp in the little meadow near Danny Park. We're not camping in that meadow, Tom told him. I want to go into the heart of the Belly. I want to camp in the trees near the joining of the creeks. But there have been reports of strange things happening in those trees, Gary said. It's the deepest, darkest place in the entire state, for Pete's sake. Are you scared? Tom asked. Heck no, Gary told him. I'm the one that originally thought of spreading those rumors. It's just that it might rain. We don't want to be caught in the Belly during a rainstorm. The creeks might flood, like they did 2 years ago. As for the chance of rain, it very rarely rained in October. The rains came in the spring. It was going to be a cold weekend, however. Nothing near freezing. For Ragdale, 45 degrees was about as cold as it got. But when it was cold, fog tended to pool in Potbelly. Tom's folks didn't like the idea of him camping in Potbelly, especially after the stories that had been circulating. They said there was a chance that Bran Harbinger, the escapee from the prison, just might be living in the bog. So Tom told his parents he changed his plans and would be spending the night at Gary Spivot's house. Gary lied and said he was spending the night at Tom's. Since Tom and Gary's parents rarely spoke to one another, there was little chance either of them would call to check on the boys. Although Tom wielded a 3D battery mag light, the darkness consumed the light like a ravenous dog. The place that had once been a child's playground was now a place of evil creatures and denizens of the night. Instead of coming here on a lark, the two boys were here to prove their bravery. The place Tom had chosen to make camp was under a malevolent oak tree, surrounded by cancerous clots of briar and weeds. Can't we go somewhere a little more cheery? Gary asked. If it weren't for you and the stories we started, we would be here for fun, Tom said. Now look at us. They set up the little two-man army pup tent Gary's grandfather had slept in during World War II, and although it was only 7 p.m., they rolled out their sleeping bags. They wanted to get this over and done with. Maybe after this, Potbelly could return to a fun place for kids to play. Remember when we played pirates here when we were young? Tom asked. I can still remember the place where we hid our treasure, Gary told him. Do you think it's still there? I wonder if my old baseball cards I put in there are worth more than they were back then. I put the photo of Timmy and I in that old box, Tom said sadly. How old would Timmy be now if he was alive? Gary asked. He'd be 14, Tom said. He was 3 years younger than me. I sure miss him. Let's dig up that old box, Gary challenged. I don't know, Tom said. It's got to be 100 yards from here. Let's do it to just prove we're not cowards, Gary declared. We'll bring the treasure back and show it to Big Lou. That'll make him wish he'd been here with us. We can use those 2 sticks over there for a shovel. Okay, let's do it, Tom said. Their light knifed ahead of them as if it were cutting through a ghost rather than through fog. It took them a while to find the spot where they had buried the box. It was beside a rock that looked much smaller now than that the boys were older. They dug the box out and placed it on the ground. It was locked by a tiny padlock, no bigger than 2 raisins. They had lost the key over the years, so Tom banged the lock open with a rock and opened the box. They were shocked and terrified with what they found. It was a heart, a real heart, and the heart was still beating. Tom threw down the box, and he and Gary ran for the tent. But in their panic, they had become disoriented. They followed their light through the brush, but the light didn't know the way back to their tent. What do you think you kids are doing here? A ghostly voice called to them. Did you hear that voice? Tom asked. The voice sounds like it's only 15 feet away, Gary shouted. Let's get the hell out of here. Which way do we go? Tom cried. Where's the big oak tree? Gary asked. We can get our bearings from there. That was when Tom dropped the light. Where's the light? Gary asked. I dropped it in the weeds, Tom yelled. Help me find it. There was no sign of the light. Either it had been turned off when Tom dropped it, or the light was hidden in the weeds. It didn't make a damn bit of difference. The fact was, the light was gone, and it was pitch black. The boys stumbled around in the weeds, looking for the light. Get out of here, the voice came again. This is a sacred ground, and it's mine. The voice had to be that of the person that had placed the heart in the box. But that was impossible. The heart was still beating when they dug it up. Then the thought came to them. It wasn't a person. It was the monster. It was the monster they had created. A sword of light sliced through the darkness. Gary had found the flashlight. Look for the big oak, Tom cried. The oak where we camped. Let's just get out of here, Gary pleaded. I have my father's gun in the sleeping bag, Tom yelled. Gary stabbed the light into the trees. In the boys' panic, the trees all looked alike. The boys were running around, zigzagging back and forth. There was no pattern to their madness. Back and forth, back and forth. I'm going to get you too, the voice growled. And when I get you, I'll put your hearts in the box. There's the tree, Gary pointed. There's our oak tree. Sure enough, under the oak was Gary's grandfather's pup tent, with the bags rolled out ready inside. Tim dove into his bag after the gun. It wasn't there. Did you do something with my dad's gun? Tom shouted. Are you even sure you brought it? Gary hollered back. You took it, Tom cried. You silly bastard, this isn't funny. I didn't take a thing, Gary screamed. Look again. I'm coming for you, the strange voice grumbled. And when I find you, I'll yank out your hearts. We gotta get out of here now, Gary shouted. Which way's home? Tom hollered back. I don't know, Gary cried. In their panic, they had lost all perspective. Potbelly was a big place, and they were in the middle. There were paths crisscrossing the belly, but all looked the same. If they hadn't been in the all-out panic, the boys probably would have seen Mrs. Tenenbaum's back porch light. It was an easy landmark that they had used many times in the past. But with the flashlight cutting the light and the thick blackness of fog, the porch light was no more than a speck. Tom, Gary cried in the night. Tom, where are you? Gary flashed the light so I can see you, Tom shouted. I dropped the light, Tom. I think I dropped it in the creek. When the boys didn't return from their camp out the next day, their parents got together and compared notes. Since Tom, Gary, and Big Lou were best friends, they decided to call Lou Springle's home. Big Lou told them that Tom and Gary had gone camping in Potbelly. The town organized a search party and searched Potbelly all day and into the night. They found the boys' pup tent with their sleeping bags inside. Tom's sleeping bag had his father's .38 caliber police special in the bottom. There was an old, muddy wooden box in the tent. The little lock had been broken off by a rock. Inside there was a small stack of baseball cards banded together, a photo of Tom and his little brother Timmy, and a plastic model of a heart Big Lou had put together in the 5th grade. They also found a large black flashlight at the confluence of Arden and Fletcher Creeks, where they flowed into the Cameron River. After the incident, Potbelly was fenced off by the city. No trespassing signs were posted every 50 feet. The chain-link fence and signs were meant to keep kids from going into Potbelly. But most people knew that the fence was there to keep the bad things in. Potbelly became a rite of passage for teenagers willing to put their lives on the line. There were a few places they could crawl under the fence, but no one died after that dreadful night. Potbelly claimed the lives of Tom Farnell and Gary Spivot because they were the ones that had invented the hoax in the first place. They died at the hand of the monster they had created.